if you're above that 40 to 45%, you really have one of two levers that you can pull. Either number one, your payroll needs to decline to get under that 40 to 45%. And there's a couple of different ways you could attack that, right? Either number one, maybe your staff needs more work and maybe they need to be more efficient to produce more revenue, which would kind of dilute your payroll. Or number two, maybe your pricing needs to change, right? Maybe they are super, super busy and maybe they're super efficient and they're producing the most that they can and you're not priced right.
Well, hello and welcome to the J. Sterling Hughes Show, where we share how we have grown our family law practice from 0 to 25 plus attorneys and 15 million in revenue, all in the past 10 years. And my purpose here is to document what's working and what's not working, with hopes that you can take that, you can recontextualize it, and shorten your success curve. I'm your host, Jeff Hughes, and I have a guest with me today, Ryan Kimler. I first came across Ryan on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was so fascinating. I listened to parts of it twice, Ryan. I don't know if I told you that, but it was so good. And so today we're going to talk about firm benchmarks, healthy margins, healthy gross margins, even what is a gross margin. And Ryan is here to talk about that. He's the founder of Net Profit CFO, founder of Financial Clarity LLC. He focuses on lawyers and helping them improve their profitability of their law firm. So Ryan, what's your story?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. You had not shared with me that you had listened to the Fredson podcast, parts of it a couple of times. That's really great to hear. Always love it when the audience gets a lot of value out of a podcast. That's really why I do it. Yeah, I mean, you shared a little bit about my story. Obviously, my background is in accounting and finance. Coming out of school several years ago, I actually started working for another CPA firm, and it just so happened that, probably 85-90% of our clientele were small law firms. And so we were virtual and nationwide before virtual was a big thing. And so that's where I really learned the law firm space and really fell in love with working with lawyers. Learned a lot of different practice areas, a lot of different states. Unfortunately, though, from an operational standpoint, that accounting firm was not run well. I always say that, from that experience, I really learned how I didn't want my firm to run one day when I had my own. And I knew that I wanted to have my own one day and do things differently. And so now today I do, and learned a lot from that experience and learned a lot about lawyers and law firms from that experience and continue to use that today.
So I recall when you were telling your story on the other podcast, you were focused on law firms exclusively for a number of years. So you saw a lot of different law firms, their books, how they managed it, and so forth. So you built your expertise up there, and then now today in your practice, you focus on law firms as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That is, I have one client here locally. While I was networking, that kind of got a hold of me and was like, hey, even though you don't typically work with my type of business, I want to work with you. And I was like, okay, I'll entertain it. But yeah, the rest of our clients are really law firms, and that's really where we focus. It's where my team and I focus.
So a lot of law firms are broken down into two major categories of B2B, so business clients, versus B2C, your normal person, individual clients. Do you distinguish in your practice between those two? Do you treat them differently? Do you have different processes for those types of firms?
I typically don't. I actually look at things more so the methods that you're using to bill. And I know that, you and I talked a little bit before the show. This is kind of, a road that we want to go down a little bit. I really split firms out. Are you billing flat rate or are you billing hourly? And the metrics that we look at and the things that we really analyze are really different based on those two things versus, really who your client is, whether that be a, person or a business.
Okay. So would you put personal injury firms in the flat rate category based on contingency, their fees, or?
They're a whole different side of the business. And I don't do a lot of work with contingency firms. Most of them have a much higher risk tolerance than I do. And so it's not that I can't help them, but I really stay away from working with them. Usually I'm working with law firms that have a service and they're either billing it like a flat rate fee or on an hourly basis. The revenue model from contingency firms would be more of a flat rate because it is a percentage of what you win. But obviously, the revenue there is very, very inconsistent, right?
Okay.
Not knowing when you're going to settle cases, not knowing when the money is actually going to be submitted, all those kinds of things.
So from an accounting, bookkeeping perspective, why does your firm distinguish between fixed fee billing type and hourly billing type?
Yep. So it all comes down to capacity, right? Because when you're doing things on a flat rate, right, a lot of law firms, when they go to a flat rate, they're probably not tracking hours, right? Which I think you shared with me, your firm is not.
Correct.
And so it really comes down to capacity. Have you priced your flat rate services in a way that you can actually get more capacity, or in other words, like have an attorney handle more cases than they would be able to if you, and comparing how much revenue is generated, than they would be able to on an hourly basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, just as a quick example, again, let's say we have an attorney and let's go the hourly rate first, because I think that's easier, probably math wise, to work out. So let's say yearly billable requirement is 1,500 hours, and let's just make the math really, really easy, $400 an hour. Okay, so 1,500 times $400 an hour, we're talking $600,000 in potential billables if they were maxed out and hit that 1,500 hour billing requirement. When we look at things on a flat rate, we can break things down hourly that way, but then we look at the products and services that you have and we say, how are you going to get that attorney to 600K in billables?
Mm-hmm.
How many cases do they really have to handle? How many cases would they have to handle on the hourly side versus how many do they have to handle on the flat fee side? Hopefully, you've structured things and set things up so that they're handling less cases on the flat fee side, right, to generate the same amount of revenue, which would mean more hours available, right, which would mean their capacity is higher. So in other words, they would have the potential to bill more than the 600K if they were doing it on an hourly basis. And so that's why we really, separate those two, and that's how we look at it, because there's potential there to have more revenue if you can set your flat fee prices in a way that's profitable and efficient.
Mm-hmm. Okay. With respect to the fixed fee situation, or clients that you've worked with, you were telling me before we started here that you've seen some challenges with some firms on executing that. Where have been the biggest challenges?
Yeah, biggest challenges I would say is if you don't have a good handle on what your hours really are before you go to a fixed fee, right, then it's hard for you to know where you should price it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I would say if you haven't operated, like on an hourly kind of method for a little while with some of the attorneys that you have hired, it's hard to know where their capacity level is and how many cases they'll be able to handle. And so where I've seen some firms really get in trouble is they price themselves too low on the flat fee side.
Mm-hmm.
They underestimate how many hours it really takes an attorney to do the case. And so then when they underestimate the hours and they underprice themselves, obviously then that attorney cannot handle as many cases as what the owner thinks they can. And so their revenue potential is not as high as what the owner thinks that it is. And then your returns kind of get squeezed.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Which we've checked all those boxes, by the way, in our starting up going, we had many cases where we completely vastly underestimated, got into lots of problems over the years. So
yep. And the thing is too, right, is you kind of have to monitor it ongoing a little bit, right? Because you probably have a case here or there that is like, it takes more hours than what's kind of allotted, right? You have your flat rate and you allot like, okay, a non-contested divorce case is going to take me X hours, right? And then it never fails that in a couple of cases, right, something will come up and you're going to go over that hours limit, right? And being able to kind of have your attorneys recognize that and also communicate that to you so you can kind of get a handle on, how often is that happening, right? So that then you have a sense of, well, hey, this has started to happen a lot more frequently. It's not just one attorney, it's multiple. And maybe we need to go back and reassess what our price is because of the hours that are really going into these cases.
Yeah. So we don't track our hours for any of our cases, which we started to do that when we switched over to fixed fee back in 2016. And the data was so inconsistent that it was useless. So we just said, we can try to force everyone to do this and then police it and regulate it, and then it still is going to be maybe partially accurate. And we just gave up on it. And so
Sure.
over time, we handle like 2,500 cases per year. So over the years, you get a real good set of data as to what a divorce should cost. So many divorces come in that are, quote, uncontested, that turn contested pretty quickly. So you can't really even go on what the client tells you. So we basically look at it like insurance. So we just know that on some cases, we're just going to get burned on. In some cases, we're going to make out, quote, a little better than we would have otherwise. And that's just the way that goes.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way to look at it. And obviously if you can kind of, cut down on, if you can pick out the circumstances on the cases where you're getting burned and kind of cut down on those a little bit, obviously that's going to improve your profitability too.
Yeah. What we found works the best is we delegate as much as we can within the firm, and we push a proactive practice. That's the two things that have to happen. And that's hard because those are sea changes for lawyers to adopt. They're just not normally used to doing that. So if I can, from a management standpoint, I know, Ryan, you see a ton of firms and you see how the owners manage the firms from a financial acumen standpoint. And I'm just curious as to what your opinion is on what are the key metrics that every firm should track, the simplest metrics that, and in particular, I'm interested in the B2C space where I play. So I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I would say there's really, from a profitability standpoint, from an operations standpoint, there's really probably narrowed down to about 6 metrics that you should really be looking at really on a monthly basis. And for the flat fee firms, it's probably one of them is probably easier for you, but let's just start with number one is case volume, right? How many invoices are going out on a monthly basis? And that's really whether you're flat fee or you're hourly, right? I want a handle on what is our, what is our sales pipeline producing basically, right? And what is the volume like at our firm? Are we picking up invoice volume? Are we approaching the point where it might be time to hire again soon? Or are we declining for some reason, right? Do we have more competition in the area, right? Or, you guys probably see a little bit of a slowdown maybe in like summertime. I don't know because I haven't talked with you about your firm, but sometimes, different practice areas have slowdown times, right? And so that's number one.
December's dead.
December. Okay, December's dead.
Christmas time.
There you go. See, you know the time. There you go. And that probably makes sense, right? You have holidays, things like that. Families are happy, all that kind of stuff, right? New Year. So that's really metric number one is let's keep a track on what our volume is. Number two, I would say is, what's the average price of the invoices that are being sent out? So on a flat fee basis, that's where for you guys, that's probably a lot easier to track, right? You could look at the invoices as the whole. Obviously, they're all going to be the same rates. And so then it's just a matter of figuring out what the weighted average is of those. And then on an hourly, that this metric is really, really important to track if you're an hourly firm, because if you don't change your hourly price on any of your people, if your average invoice value is increasing, in other words, like let's say your average is $500 and all of a sudden the next it's $750 or $800 or $1,000, something like that. It might be that your case volume has declined. And so in order for the attorneys to stay busy, they're putting more hours on a bill. And so if they're putting more hours on a bill, obviously that's going to drive your average price up. Versus you go the other way, if you guys are really, really, really busy on the hourly side and your average price drops, they're probably just doing enough that they have to kind of move the case forward, right? And they don't have additional time to put into the case, right? They're, in other words, kind of, running around putting out fires where they need to, right? So those two metrics really tie into your revenue and kind of the velocity of the firm, right? As far as like, are we on a growth trajectory? Are we, slowing down, right? Those two metrics, tracking those are critical when it comes to knowing the velocity of the firm and kind of revenue and how the firm is doing.
Yeah. So what I heard you say there was the equivalent of what we call open files. So new files being opened, so the volume of cases coming in, and then what's your average revenue for
average price
files?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. And then after that, we really get into the expense side of things. So first one on the expense side of things that I always like to review is direct cost.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the more traditional sense of accounting, right, is this would be called your cost of goods sold. And this was really for businesses that sold products, right? So like you would buy a widget, or buy widget parts and make a widget, right? And you had costs to buy those parts before you sold a final product.
Right.
But I think for law firms, there are a couple of categories that I would put in direct cost that are paid and are specifically tied to the cases that you're working on. So number one would be like pay-per-click advertising, right? If you're doing that like in the Google ad space or Facebook or wherever, right? Some of those advertising costs are directly tied to you signing another case. And so I would put that in direct costs.
So that's interesting because we don't do that here. We don't include that. So how would you put like a branding spend?
I would put that as more marketing. And that's one of the metrics that I'm watching as well. But that's more in your regular operating expenses.
Okay.
So there's a really important
like direct response marketing goes into direct costs. And
yep.
Yeah, got it.
And then I would also put like co-counsel if you're using outside counsel or if you're using like contract labor. I would also put those things in direct cost. They are, the things that you can directly tie to as expenses on cases.
Okay.
Also, if you're flat fee, I assume your flat fee probably includes court costs.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Filing fees and so forth.
Yep. I would put those in direct cost as well.
What about your labor, your attorney labor, your paralegal labor?
So if they're hired employees, I would put them down in payroll. That's in expenses, and that's another metric that I'd be watching. If they're contractors, like if you have contract labor, then that would be direct costs for sure.
Okay. So you would not put your legal labor costs in direct costs. You'd put that
down in expenses.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And this metric is probably the hardest one to explain out of the 6, but it's really important. What we're trying to capture here is what are the costs that are directly related to cases.
Okay.
Right. Obviously, your direct response advertising spend is directly related to you signing more cases, right? Like I said, if you're using like Google AdWords, the more Google AdWords gets clicked, hopefully the more cases that you have, right? But being able to monitor that in your direct cost is really, really important so you can start evaluating the efficiency of your ad spend.
Got it. Okay, cool.
And then the last 3, which we've touched on a little bit, kind of a sneak peek, is payroll, marketing, overhead. So those are really 3 expense buckets that I put all of the expenses into that, like I said, so payroll, as you brought up, right, that would be your legal staff that are employees hired in-house. Even if they're part-time, if they're classified as a W-2 employee, they're more of a fixed cost, right? If you're like, let's say you're paying an attorney and they're on salary and their expectation is to work 45 or 50 hours a week. If they're working 40 cases or they're working 50 cases, what you're paying them if they're on a salary basis doesn't change, right? And so that's why it's more of a grouped overhead expense.
Okay.
Versus a contractor, if you have them working 40 cases versus if they're working 50 cases and you're paying them by the hour, their cost changes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's really important here. I'm going to make this note too. When I go through and I'm looking at all the payroll, I'm including anything that's associated with paying our people. So that's not just wages, it's taxes, health insurance, workers' comp, 401k, any other retirement benefits. I'm really grouping everything into the payroll bucket.
Okay. So you've got your revenue, and then out of that, you've got these 4 expense buckets. And for each of these 4 expense buckets, what do you like to see as a healthy benchmark as a percentage of revenue for each of these?
Yep. So it is going to depend on, I would say that there's 2 stages of a firm. One of them is you're really trying to optimize for profit. And the other one is if you're really in a growth phase, right? Obviously it takes money to grow. Those metrics are going to be way, way, way different. But to optimize a firm, the 3 kind of percentages that I really want to have for payroll, marketing, and overhead. Payroll, somewhere between 40 and 45%. that includes you as the owner being on salary. And I'll dive into this real quick, at a reasonable salary.
Yeah.
Now, when I say reasonable, I'm not talking IRS, like let me pay myself as little as possible to cut down on payroll taxes. I'm talking like reasonable living salary. Like if you worked at another firm, you would be paid, right? So like just to throw some numbers to this, what that means is if you're $1 million business, it doesn't mean $100,000. That's probably too low. It also doesn't mean $450,000, right? Out of $1 million. That's probably too high, right? You're probably in the 150, 175, 200, somewhere in there as the owner of $1 million practice, right? So when I say reasonable, that's kind of the range that I'm really talking about. All right. And so then your payroll costs with you, 40 to 45%. That includes your admin staff, right? All of those things. And again, this is on your, what I call your net revenue number. All right. So this is after we've taken out direct costs.
Okay. So before you do, let me back up to that on direct costs. What do you typically like to see on what are your expenses there? %?
Yeah. So it really depends. Again, there, especially what can really vary there is the direct advertising cost. Depends on how competitive of a space that you're in. But from a gross revenue perspective, I mean, I don't like to see more than 10% indirect costs. And that's kind of all in, all done. I mean, there are certain circumstances where that can vary, right? It really depends on what you have going on in your situation. But, of the revenue that's coming in the door, I really want 90% of it at least that we can allocate towards the other 3 expense buckets that you have.
Okay. So the 40 to 45% payroll, that is 40 to 45% of the 90% that's left over.
No, so the 90% that's left over becomes your new 100%.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Okay.
Yep. So so that's a good distinction. So if you have direct costs of 10%, right? So, your $500,000 law firm or $1 million law firm, let's say direct cost 10%, you would be left with $900K.
Okay.
So the 40 to 45% is of the $900K.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Then we roll into other marketing, which would really be like your brand marketing, right? Like you were asking about earlier. Typically costs there 10 to 15%. I don't want to see the marketing go over that. And again, that's on the $900K, right? If we have $1 million firm, 10% cost, it's on the $900K.
So 10 and then I hear you say 10 to 15. Did I hear that right?
Yep.
Okay.
10 to 15. Yep. And then your overhead, 20 to 25, sometimes can really be less than that, especially, in today's age where I think a lot of law firms have cut back on the office space that they're renting, right? Because we have hybrid and remote employees. But 20 to 25 is, I think, reasonable there to cover, all of your softwares, legal research, CLE, bar dues, all that kind of stuff goes into that other overhead bucket, office rent, etc. So usually, when I'm working with a firm, we're really trying to optimize for profit before we grow. Usually there's some sort of combination between those numbers, between payroll, marketing, and overhead, that we can get the firm to a 20 to 25% net income margin. And again, this is really with the owner being on payroll already at a really reasonable salary. So, that means if we have a, net after our direct cost of $1 million, we're really keeping at least $200K of that million, probably closer to $250K.
Okay.
Which then obviously you've got to pay taxes on and things like that. But having that much of a net income before you really start growing is really, really important, because that's when your business is optimized.
Just to kind of play that back, you like to see, you try to get your clients to the 20 to 25% bottom line profit.
Yep.
Again, would that be of the 90 that's left over? That'd be of the full.
Yeah.
Amount.
So when you bring the whole thing down, right? So if we had, a $1 million firm, and then let's say that they had 10% direct costs, right? That would obviously come down to $900K left. Yes, it would be 20 to 25% of the $900K that's left.
So $180K roughly if they over 20. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. I love how you break all this up. So it's pretty easy to segment that out. So whenever you mentioned that there are 2 types of firms, one that's optimizing for profit, one that's trying to grow.
Yep.
When there's a growth firm, that you're dealing with, I'm assuming you see marketing more, probably payroll a bit more. Am I assuming right? Or
Yep.
where do you see
Yeah.
the differentials primarily
Yep.
coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. Primarily, it is in marketing and in payroll, which is why we break those two separate out from, the other overhead expenses. Usually, overhead doesn't change much, right? The costs there are really, really, really small. I mean, you might have to go out and buy someone a new computer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you're talking, that's maybe $1,000 compared to, hey, we just hired a new attorney at 100K, right, which is $8,000 a month, right? So yes, the big changes there are in marketing and in payroll, especially in marketing if you're in a really competitive space and you're really trying to take over some additional market share. Yeah, those are typically the areas where we see those profit percentage points go.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously at that point, again, depending on the situation, I really don't, even if we're in growth mode, right? I really don't like to see profits dip below a net 8%.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like that's a good number where there's enough margin there, there's enough percentage points there that we shouldn't get into losses, right? 8% is kind of the floor that I want to be at, because I don't like to see us lose money.
Yeah.
Net losses.
Yeah.
Not good.
So when clients come to you initially and you're looking
Yep.
at their books and you're looking at their operations, where do you see the most waste typically? So where's the low-hanging fruit for lawyers to trim waste and get more profit?
Yep. Number one, for sure, hands down, is pricing. Hands down, without question. Number one is pricing.
Tell me more about that. I don't want to just derail you, but I love where that's going. So what does that mean?
And well, let me tell you number two, because they kind of tie together. Number two is payroll, right? So let's first run this test, right? If you're a law firm owner out there, go get your profit and loss, right? Add up all your payroll costs and divide it out and see where you fall on the percentage scale, right? If you're above that 40 to 45%, you really have one of two levers that you can pull. Either number one, your payroll needs to decline to get under that 40 to 45%. And there's a couple of different ways you could attack that, right? Either number one, maybe your staff needs more work and maybe they need to be more efficient to produce more revenue, which would kind of dilute your payroll. Or number two, maybe your pricing needs to change, right? Maybe they are super, super busy and maybe they're super efficient and they're producing the most that they can and you're not priced right. So pricing, hands down, number one, right? And I talk about this model quite a bit, but there's an old school rule, old school. I don't even know when it was created. It might be older than me, to be honest. But it was the rule of thirds, right? So payroll should be a third, overhead should be a third, and you should have profits of a third, right? So in other words, that would expect, you would expect a 3x return on an attorney, right? So if you hired them for 100K, they should produce you 300, and of that 300, right? Again, a third, right? That was kind of the old school rule, right? The problem when I look at the numbers that I really have with that is, as an attorney becomes more senior and you start to pay them more, and typically they start to get into more marketing and really generating cases for the firm, you're not going to get a 3x return. You're going to be squeezed, and it's going to be more of a 2x, if that. Sometimes it's less, right? So instead, I really look at things on a sliding scale. From a pricing standpoint, from a payroll standpoint, is all of your attorneys should fall between a 2 and a 5x return. So like I just talked about, right, your partner attorneys that are doing a lot of marketing, yes, they probably bill at a higher rate, but they're probably not billing as many hours because they're out marketing, right? Building relationships, all that kind of thing. And they're also more experienced. So you have to pay them at a higher rate in order to keep them and be competitive. So like obviously, a 3x return on 100K is a lot different than a 3x return on a 200K, right?
Yeah.
So on the partner attorneys, they're probably more to that 2x side, right? They're doing a lot of marketing. The complete opposite end of the scale, the 5x side, are your brand new associate attorneys right out of school, right? And where this model really makes sense is they're not doing any marketing hours, right? They're not generating cases. Their whole entire day should be billing, right? And learning the law and training, right? And so the hours that you're capturing on their end should all be casework, right?
Mhm.
Probably pretty close to 100%, but that's what they need to do for their career, right? And at the same time, those are also the people that you pay the least,
Mhm.
because they are the least experienced. And so that's why your returns on the brand new associate attorneys can really be in that 4 or 5x range,
Yeah.
right? So, just quick example, if we just run the numbers, let's just round numbers really easy. Paying an attorney 100K as a salary, 5x return would be 500K, right? So I always work with 49 weeks in a year, take out 3 weeks for vacation, sick time, holidays. That would mean that attorney needs to bill and collect $10,204 a week. If we divide that by an hourly rate, or if you're doing a flat rate, right, you really need to look at how many cases can they handle and close in a week, and how much revenue does that produce. Is it greater than that 10,204?
Mm-hmm.
If you're on an hourly rate, let's take the hourly rate. Let's just say you're billing $350. That would mean they would need to bill and collect 29.15 hours a week. Pretty reasonable, right? If they're operating, and granted, some of the time I know with new attorneys gets written off, right, because they're inefficient, right? But if they're operating efficiently, 75% efficiency would actually be really, really low. That's working 38 hours a week, right? So that's where I kind of come in and check the numbers and kind of go through the math and see, like, does this really work out? But that's one of the easiest ways to know if you're priced right or not. Can you get a 5x return on that brand new associate attorney?
Yeah.
And then really analyzing your team. Where is everybody at? What kind of a return am I getting? Do I have a good balance between partner attorneys and associate attorneys?
Yeah. So if you're in the middle there, you're not a new attorney, you're not a partner level, senior level, you're kind of you don't want to be in that, you don't want to be in that space, it seems like.
That's where, so it can be really hard to really judge, kind of those attorneys in the middle that are more senior, right? They're starting to market. Should they be a 3x return? Should they be a 4x return? But again, I try to look at things on a sliding scale. And if you have other attorneys in the firm that you could kind of compare them to, right? Like Jim is doing more marketing than Joe, right? Then you kind of know where to put them on the scale. But having a good balance between, newer associate attorneys that you're getting 4 and 5x returns on are really going to balance out your partner attorneys well.
Yeah.
That you're getting a 2x return on. And from a case management working capacity, it works out really well too, right? Because if you don't have enough associate attorneys to support the partner attorneys, nobody's going to be handling those cases.
Yeah. I've seen this phenomenon happen pretty much since we started. It happened before that with another large player that's based in St. Louis, actually Cordell. I meet very few lawyers who have any desire to market at all and go out and network and all that sort of thing. It's 1 in 10, maybe, probably more like 1 in 20. But with the rise of digital and how easy it is to get into that and master it, you're starting to see these firms start to really grow like our size. There's a bunch of them now, even in our area where there weren't when we started 10 years ago. So I think that model's being challenged to what you're talking about with the attorneys who go out and rainmake. It's changed a lot. So let me just shift a little bit to owner's financial benefit. And I've heard this talked about a little bit, and I know you do with your clients. So how do you, when you're sitting down with one of your law firm partners or groups, how do you talk to them about the entire benefit to them financially of owning the firm, their salary, their profit, and what are the other components that you would consider part of that financial benefit?
Yep, great question. So I always look at, as you mentioned, we always start with their salary, right? What are you making on a regular basis? And then we also look at distributions, right? Which are really payments from profits above and beyond their salary, right? Mm-hmm. And inside of those distributions, there's not a entity structure in the US that the business can pay the taxes. It's always a personal liability. Mm-hmm. It's always passed through to the owner. So if you get to the end of the year, and I'm just going to use round numbers, let's just say you owe $50,000 in taxes, and you take that money out of your business to go and pay that bill, that is really an owner's benefit to you as well, right? Mm-hmm. So granted, you don't get it, put it in your pocket, but that's an owner's benefit to you as well, that your business basically just paid your tax bill. So that's included in your distributions that we're always looking at. And then we also look at healthcare as well. Some healthcare is deductible, some of it is not. Some of it you can pay some of it on behalf of your business, some of it's not. We also look at retirement contributions and what you can make there, because obviously some of your 401k matches and things like that can be deducted. And so that's an owner's benefit as well. That's going towards your retirement. I really just, every situation is different with all the owners, but I try to get down to a net number of, hey, this is really the benefit that you have. And then obviously, there's additional money that they could access to a point, right? But we all have to have money in our operating account to run our business, right? Sometimes we can get some money out of there, right? And kind of cut back on how many months of expenses we have in the bank. But I like to keep that at a pretty healthy number as well.
So Ryan, for your business, how do you work with lawyers? What services do you offer? Do you offer fractional CFO, for example? I'm just curious what your range of services are.
Yep. Yeah, so we really focus and specialize completely in the advisory space. So we don't do taxes for law firms. We do not handle any bookkeeping work. The large majority of our business, probably 90-95%, is really working with lawyers in this way, kind of like you and I have just been talking here on this podcast, completely from an advisory capacity, reviewing what their financials are doing, reviewing what's working in the business, what's not, reviewing pricing. Typically, we are building out a financial dashboard for the owner so that we have all of those important numbers on one page. Everything is color coordinated, green, yellow, red, so we know what's working, what's not very easily. And then from there, we take the numbers that are in red and we work with the owners to put a plan together and really make changes in their business, how we can affect those numbers, how we can change the numbers that are holding them back from making more profits, more cash flow. That is really 90-95% of our business is really on that advisory capacity, helping law firms grow, helping them grow profits. The other 5-10%, I don't talk about a ton, is we do a little bit of forensic accounting work. So, if you've got, if you're using a trust account and you're like, hey, Ryan, I messed up. I didn't keep great records. I have $3,000 in my trust account that I have no idea who it belongs to. We'll dive in and we'll kind of put those records together and figure out like who's really owed that money. Make sure that you're all compliant and squared away for the bar. Make sure that your trust account is really reconciled and completely tied out. And then if you want us to do that and work with you on an ongoing basis after we have kind of solve the mystery, if you will, and kind of put the puzzle together. If you want us to kind of keep you on the straight and narrow and keep you in line, we do offer continuous monthly reconciliations there. But again, that's really only on the trust account. And typically, the firms that we're working with, they're working with a bookkeeper already. Maybe the bookkeeper isn't, maybe they're a generalist, maybe they are not familiar with law firms and can't handle the trust part of it. Then we will. But that's really the other small part of a business that I don't talk about a lot.
Okay. So how long does your typical engagement last with your law firms?
Yeah, great question. So typically, we're setting things up to work together at least a year.
Okay.
So we're going to start at the beginning of the year and we're going to set targets for the end of the year. Where do we want the firm to be? And not just from a revenue cases perspective, but also going all the way to the bottom, kind of working through those 6 metrics, at least that I just talked about on this podcast, on the show, and getting down to what's your net income number? What's your net cash flow number? What's your net owner's benefit, right? We're going to work through all of that and we're going to set targets and really set kind of a heading for the law firm and goals on where we want to be by the end of the year. Typically clients work with us for much more than a year. We don't do contracts. We don't do long-term contracts at my firm. Everything is month to month. You can cancel with a 30-day notice, but most all of our clients end up working with us for more than a year because they like the value that we bring.
Nice. So I noticed on your site, you had a number of pretty good resources. I actually tried to order some. I'll probably come in my inbox here soon, but how would a lawyer that wants to know more about you get that information, get into your orbit, reach out to you, that sort of stuff?
Sure, absolutely. So a few things that I'll kind of put out there to watch for that are coming up. So easiest way, if you want to book a call with me, is probably just netprofitcfo.com. My calendar link is right in the upper right hand corner, so you can book a short 30-minute meeting with me. And then, as you mentioned, there are some additional tools on my website you can download as well if you wish. I do have a book coming out later this month, Bottom Line Profits. It's really a guide for attorneys. Kind of, some of what we've talked about today is definitely going to be in the book, but all about helping law firms grow their profits. So my book will be available on my website soon. And then a little bit later this month as well, I am speaking at a law firm growth summit. I am one of 17 or 18 speakers. We've got a great lineup of speakers available. Fretson is one of them. I think that's where you originally heard me, was on Steve Fretson's podcast. He'll be one of the speakers at the event as well. And you can find that and more details on that event on my LinkedIn page. If you search Ryan Kimler, last name is Kimler. Google always does a really good job of bringing up LinkedIn, and you can register for that Law Firm Growth Summit there on my LinkedIn page.
Well, terrific. This has been really fascinating to me. So I've learned a ton here. I don't know if anyone else on the call will learn as much as I have, but it's been a really fascinating time. So thank you.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was really great. I love diving into this stuff and talking about it, and I hope you got a lot of value out of it and your audience as well. So,
well, thank you.